John and Ed, they're on patrol, chasing shadows, heart and soul. Cryptid hunter UFO, down this rabbit hole they go. In the woods and on the street, whispers follow their heartbeat. Alien eyes, giant's feet, all got shadows they all meet. Down the rabbit hole they dive, midnight secrets start to thrive. Mysteries keep them alive. In the dark, does truth survive? Haunted houses, midnight calls, endless echoes in the halls. Ghostly murmurs, secret falls, every clue, they chase them all. Whispers follow their heartbeat. Alien eyes, giant's feet, all got shadows they all meet. Down the rabbit hole they dive, midnight secrets start to thrive. Mysteries keep them alive. In the dark, does truth survive? Haunting walls, they've got the key. Hidden fears, they set them free. Cryptid hunter, you and me, down this rabbit hole, let's see. Unseen worlds, they've got the key. Hidden fears, they set them free. Cryptid hunter, you and me, down this rabbit hole, let's see.
Good evening, all. Welcome to the lab. I'm here in my alchemy lab.
Yeah, you have to worry what John's cooking up in his little alchemy lab, trying to turn haggis into gold or something.
Trying to domesticate haggis.
Yeah, well, this is the Scotsmen have been attempting to domesticate haggis for about 700 years, as far as I know.
Yeah,
so
I watched
eluded them.
Cracking program last night on YouTube about some Russian scientist who had domesticated foxes. It was really good. And the foxes changed within like 4 generations into almost dogs. And all he did was pick the tamest ones to breed from.
Well, the Russians domesticate bears as well. I mean, foxes are pretty tame. Fox is a pretty tame thing for a Russian to be domesticating.
And
I'd be more impressed if you'd said moose.
Yeah, the weaponized washing machines. Anyway, apart from that.
Don't forget hypersonic shovels. It's amazing how much damage a shovel can do if you shoot it fast enough.
Let's come back from the real world. We don't want to really be there just now because the real world's nuts. Welcome, everyone.
Tomorrow we're talking about alchemy tonight.
Welcome, everyone. Oh, Vaughn graces us with his presence this evening. Shalini Varma. Julie, Beats and Tapes, Nick to read us. Julie and Red Eye, as always. Good to see you guys. Ray, who've I missed? Nobody. Is that us? Well, that's all. Everybody that actually says they're here. Shalene's been watching a thing about capybaras. They're like giant guinea pigs, aren't they?
They're very weird creatures.
Are they the world's biggest rodent?
Certainly look like it.
They're kind of like landlocked beavers, aren't they?
Yeah, they're odd. They're some sort of. I don't know. Apparently, they're really friendly as well. They're kind of really docile. They just are.
Right. Okay, let's get on with it. So we've got people on. No doubt more people will join, but it's time for our little tale. So sit back. Is it Beats and Tapes that likes the tales? He's in already. So sit back and prepare yourselves, because here we go. The shadowy recesses of a forgotten library in Edinburgh. A peculiar manuscript was discovered during renovations. Bound in cracked leather and smelling faintly of sulphur. It bore no title, only an alchemical symbol embossed on the cover. A serpent devouring its own tail. The Ouroboros. The manuscript was attributed to an enigmatic figure known only as the Alchemist of Greyfriars, a man whose name has been erased from history, but whose legend whispered through the centuries. The manuscript promised a revelation, the secret to transmuting not just lead into gold, but the human soul into something divine. It was said to contain the formula for eternal life. But as with all alchemical pursuits, there was a cost that few were willing to pay. This is the story of one man who dared. The tale begins in 1645, during the height of the plague that ravaged Scotland. Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh was not just a cemetery, but a place of whispered secrets and forbidden experiments. Among its residents was an alchemist named Elias Morven, a recluse who claimed he could cure the plague. His home, nestled near the kirkyard, reeked of strange fumes and glowed with unnatural light at night. Elias was obsessed with discovering the Philosopher's Stone, not for wealth, but for immortality. He believed that death was an imperfection of the human condition, one that could be corrected through alchemy. He worked tirelessly, mixing mercury with sulphur, distilling strange elixirs, and describing cryptic symbols on parchment. One night, as the plague crept closer to his door, Elias claimed he had succeeded. He emerged from his home with a vial of shimmering liquid, a potion he called Aurum Vitae, the gold of life. He offered it to his dying neighbours, promising salvation. But those who drank it did not recover. Instead, they were transformed into something horrifying. Twisted beings with golden veins coursing beneath their skin and eyes that glowed like molten metal. They lived, but at a terrible cost. Elias vanished soon after, leaving behind his laboratory and the cursed manuscript that details his experiments. Some say he fled into the catacombs beneath Greyfriars Kirkyard. Others believe he drank his own potion and became something more or less than human. Fast forward to the present day. In Edinburgh entered Dr. Callum Fraser, a historian specialising in occult tech. Callum had always been sceptical of alchemy, dismissing it as pseudoscience wrapped in mysticism. But when he stumbled upon Elias Morven's manuscript during a research trip to Greyfriars Library, something about it captivated him. The manuscript was written in Latin and riddled with arcane symbols and diagrams. It spoke of purifying the soul through fire and binding the essence of eternity within. At first glance, it seemed like typical alchemical nonsense, until Callum noticed something strange. Embedded within the text were chemical formulas that modern science recognised as precursors to advanced nanotechnology. Could it be possible that Elias Morven had stumbled upon something real? Something well ahead of its time? Callum became obsessed. He began recreating Morven's experiments in secret, using modern equipment to refine the ancient formulas. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. His friends noticed he was withdrawing from them, spending all his time locked away in his flat. Then came the breakthrough. One night, as the wind howled and the rain lashed the windows, Callum succeeded in synthesizing what he believed to be aurum vitae. The liquid shimmered like molten gold in its vial, emitting a faint hum that seemed to resonate with his very soul. He hesitated. Should he drink it? The manuscript warned that only those with pure intent could survive the transformation on the scave. What did that even mean? Was his intent pure, or was he driven by vanity and fear of death? Callum rationalised his decision. If this worked, it would be the greatest discovery in human history, a cure for mortality itself. He raised the vial to his lips, and he drank. At first, nothing happened. Then came the pain, searing heat coursing through his veins as if his blood had turned to lava. He collapsed to the floor, writhing in agony, golden light pouring from his eyes and mouth. When he awoke hours later, he felt different, stronger, sharper. His reflection in the mirror revealed golden veins beneath his skin and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Just as described in Morven's note, he felt invincible, but also hollow, as if some part was missing. Over the next few days, Callum discovered that his body healed instantly from injuries and that he no longer needed food or sleep. But there were side effects. He began hearing whispers, voices speaking in languages he didn't quite understand, and seeing shadowy figures lurking at the edges of his vision. Worse still, everyone around him seemed repelled by him. His friends avoided him, strangers crossed the street when they saw him coming. It was as if they could sense something unnatural, something otherworldly about him. Desperate for answers, Callum returned to Greyfriars Kirkyard and descended into its catacombs, searching for any trace of Elias Morven. Deep within the labyrinthine tunnels, he found a hidden chamber, a laboratory frozen in time. And there he found Elias, or what remained of him. Sitting at a desk, covered in dust, was the figure encased entirely in gold. A statue with glowing eyes that seemed alive yet unmoving. In its hand was a note, scrawled hastily. The price is too high. Callum realised that it was too late. It was too late what Morven had tried to warn him about. Immortality wasn't a gift, it was a curse. The transformation didn't just preserve life, it trapped the soul within an eternal prison of flesh and gold. As Callum stood frozen in horror before Morven's gilded corpse, he felt his own body begin to stiffen. The whispers grew louder, shadows closed in around him. His last coherent thought before darkness consumed him was this: some secrets are meant to remain buried. Weeks later, construction workers at Greyfriars uncovered an ancient laboratory hidden beneath the kirkyard. But no sign of Callum Fraser was ever found. Only two golden statues stood side by side, one dressed in old time clothes and one in modern clothing, both with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The legend of Elias Morven gained new life after this discovery, but so too did its warning. Be wary of seeking immortality, for what you gain may cost you your humanity or your very soul itself. Dun dun dun!
That was good.
Yeah.
It kind of sums up alchemy quite well as a general thing. And also, can we just point out, just for the censors and the YouTube people, that don't try and turn lead into gold. Don't try and drink anything stupid. Don't go onto the internet, read some stupid recipe from some alchemist and think you can make it and end up drinking it or giving it to someone else to drink or whatever. So don't do this at home.
Oh, didn't he do that? Didn't he do that? Oh, right. Okay, where shall we start? Shall we start at the beginning?
I think the beginning is a good place to start, because alchemy is something that is incredibly old, but it also seems to tie in to, because there seem to me to be two aspects of alchemy. There's the side of it that is all kind of mystical and philosopher's stones and other things, and then there's another side that's the kind of chemistry side of things that's been incredibly useful. I mean, one of the earliest alchemists was Paracelsus, and he effectively created modern medicine. I mean, certainly what we now call pharmacology is largely a result of his research. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, as you say, it seems to be both in the physical world and in the metaphysical world.
Mm.
And I mean, a lot of store is put in the medieval times and even the Islamic times before that, but it really goes back to chem, which was the ancient word for Egypt, wasn't it?
Mm. And I wouldn't be surprised if, like every other aspect of civilization, it all
goes back to
starts in
Sumeria. Yeah.
And I mean, it seems like there's a lot of ancient knowledge in there, and I'm not sure. I mean, ultimately, if you could create something like a philosopher's stone, you wouldn't, if you were half sensible, you wouldn't tell anyone about it anyway.
Yeah.
But it would be pretty difficult to hide this super aged, like 500-year-old. I don't know. I mean, does the philosopher's stone keep you young or keep you alive? Because there's a big difference between the two.
It's supposed to reverse aging.
Right. So it keeps you young.
Yeah.
But go on.
Well, yeah. I mean, so there's all sorts of fables and stories about it, and I mean, let's go back to Egypt, to Thoth, the Egyptian god, who some say is Hermes Trismegistus, because they don't really think he was a real person, but there's an awful lot ascribed to him. So I'm not quite sure why they don't think he was a real person, because somebody had to write all this down.
That's a good question. I mean, it's also there is a strand amongst archaeologists and historians that like to ascribe to myth and legend things that they can't quite fit in one of their neat little boxes. And yeah, I mean, it's when you have something this ancient, you're going to have characters in it who are equally ancient as the story, and then it's quite easy to write off what they were saying or writing or doing or inventing or whatever as either someone else's invention or whatever. I mean, it's quite common, certainly with really old things and some of the more esoteric type of things that we sort of see with alchemy, certainly.
Yeah, so I think when it was kind of designed and or not designed, but kind of thought of and came to fruition in ancient Egypt or even Sumeria or whatever, it was probably more of a metaphysical thing, more of a philosophical thing that people thought about and talked about rather than practiced. Maybe I might be wrong.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you take it right the way back to ancient Egypt or ancient Sumeria, there are bound to have been people who had a scientist's curiosity and
Hmm.
looked at things like gold or bronze. I mean, we were talking about this earlier, that if you look at how steel is made, for example, you take iron and you combine it with um, carbon effectively to make steel, I think. I think there's other ingredients as well. But then you can use things like nickel that turn it into stainless steel. And okay, you're not turning lead into gold, but you're taking something like iron, and by mixing it with other things, you're creating something else that's more useful, stronger,
Yeah.
rust as easily, etc. And I mean, that's the chemical part of well, the the chem part of the alchemy. So there's a certain aspect. This is why it's so fascinating, because there's a certain aspect of it that is actually founded in science, and some of the alchemists, people like what's his name,
Well,
James,
I'll be
John
honest.
Dee.
I don't think it's founded in science. I think it founded science in some respects.
I agree. I think it's. I mean, to me, it's the earliest example of I don't know, some guy that's got too much time on his hands because he had really rich parents, and he's just super curious, and he's looking at different metals and different liquids and different things that come out of the earth and all this kind of stuff, and trying to understand it and categorize it. And I mean, if you look at Paracelsus, who was 1493 to 1541, Swiss physician and alchemist and philosopher, um, his contribution to medicine and to human thought in general is astounding. And for his age, quite remarkable, because I mean, this is not a period of history where there was a large amount of kind of scientific learning. Everything was very controlled by the church, and if you strayed outside of church doctrine, you suddenly become a heretic, and you're just as likely to be burnt at the stake as anything else.
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course, the church had a kind of vested interest in alchemy as well, though, because let's face it, no one really, no one really going to turn you down if you say you can make more gold.
Well, this and the thing with that is that I wonder whether the whole turning lead into gold thing is not a metaphor for something else. That's, I mean, this is maybe a topic for a little bit later on in the show, because this is straying more into the metaphysical side. But maybe this whole story about people turning lead into gold was actually done to discredit them.
Well,
And that actually, when an alchemist talk about turning lead into gold, they weren't actually talking about turning physical lead into physical gold. That it was a metaphor for something else, and that other people who are attempted, I don't know, maybe church people attempting to discredit these alchemists, would then pick up on something like, "Oh, this crazy bastard thinks that you can turn lead into gold. Oh, look how crazy he is! Is everyone
well,
laughing at him?"
yes and no, because if you think about it, and you go back, and if you go back to like Roman times, even you've got people like Pliny the Elder, who's quite disparaging about al- alchemic practices, because a lot of them make things look like they're better than they are. You know, in fact,
Hmm.
you could actually say, was this the beginning of fraud? Because they would make potions and like sulfur and mercury and whatever that if you dipped a silver spoon into it would come out tarnished in a gold colour. And if you took a bit of
Hmm.
sandpaper or emery cloth or some kind of abrasive to it, you could soon get rid of the tarnish and make it silver again. But effectively what you're doing there is you're turning silver into what looks like gold.
Sure.
And then
I
you've
mean, this
got
is,
the gemstones. So you've got and our friends the Indians, right, are taking crystals and using potions and dyes that they've made dyeing them different colours like emerald to pass them off as emeralds when they're nothing of the sort, you know. And Pliny seems to think this was quite an abuse, because there must have been plenty of people doing it, and that then started to give alchemists, a bad name.
Sure. I mean, that's if you think that evidence of ancient batteries has been found in places like Iraq, which is ancient Mesopotamia, Sumeria sort of area.
Yeah, the Baghdad battery. Yeah.
Sure. And there's you wouldn't necessarily use that for powering lights, because you'd have had to invent a light bulb. But something like that could be used for electroplating. So
yeah.
It's the kind of thing that an alchemist could essentially electroplate something in gold and then pass it off. And if you're sort of talking to an unschooled audience, I mean, you electroplate something by taking a silver fork and sticking it in a solution with gold in it, and then applying electric charge, and the ions kind of attract, and you put in a silver fork and you pull out a gold fork.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that you'd get a wow factor. Certainly.
Oh, you would, yeah, you would, and you probably wouldn't.
But then not all alchemists were fraud, because if you look, I mean, there are plenty of people, Paracelsus, John Dee, for example, who were.
But Paracelsus wasn't looking at it from the point of view of trying to turn anything into gold. He was looking at it from the point of view of trying to help people to heal, wasn't he? He was, as you said, he was more like a father of medicine and pharmacology than someone trying to make a fast buck. I mean, this guy was the first NHS.
Well, kind of, but he integrated alchemy into medicine, believing that understanding the chemical process within the body was crucial for healing. So I mean, alchemy to a certain extent is also as much about understanding as it is about practical experimentation and creating philosopher's stone. I think it's like you said, it's the original science. Alchemists are they're kind of the original scientists, and what we now see as, if you take someone like Nikola Tesla, I mean, he's kind of an electrical alchemist, not necessarily chemical sort of thing, but a lot of the stuff that he did to this day is still amazing. I mean, some of the pictures of him in Wardenclyffe with his big Tesla coils and electricity zapping around the room and stuff like that. I mean, Tesla was doing things that still to this day, I mean, everyone who uses an electrical device can thank Nikola Tesla, because they've all got Tesla's technology in them.
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot of stuff that he came out with which was in his papers that was disappeared by the feds.
Donald Trump's uncle.
Yeah, which is fascinating as well. And one wonders what else there was in his research, and what other things that he might have discovered that, I don't know, some things that are potentially too dangerous. I mean, you create something that, if he'd invented, say, the death rate, because there was all the stories about Tesla's death rate when he was alive. And if someone invented something like that, then actually it would be kind of responsible to bury it and make sure the bloody thing never sees the light of day, given what humans are capable of doing to each other. But then I don't credit the US federal government with that much. What's the word I'm looking for? Let's just say niceness, because they're a bunch of malign, evil bastards. And if they can find a super weapon to have power over everyone else, then they'll bloody well use it. They've done it before.
Oh, actually, here's a good point. I'd just like to point out, people, that monetization is turned off to avoid you being interrupted by nasty adverts. So I've decided to turn it off just now, because I don't make enough on these shows for it to really bother you, you know? It bothers me, but it doesn't bother you. So I've turned the monetization off, but you can still feel free to give super chats and stuff like that. And you can always support us at coffee.com/Sergeant Grumpy. Because anything that you do sling my way is gratefully received and much appreciated. Right, what about this concept of the archeus, a vital force governing alchemical reactions in living bodies?
Is that, I mean...
This was Paracelsus that came up with
Sure.
this.
That, to me, when I was reading about it, sounds very much like the Chinese concept of qi.
Well, the Chinese are quite big into alchemy as well.
For sure.
And this is the thing that gets me about alchemy. It's not peculiar to one continent or one culture. It's spread across them all, you know?
Sure. But it's almost like a word for curiosity, because a lot of certainly the alchemists that are mentioned in the literature, they seem like very intelligent, very curious people who are just trying to understand the world effectively. And in Paracelsus's case, it was all to do with the human body and trying to help people and curing the sick and things like that. And then with other alchemists, I guess like Nicholas Flamel and John Dee, it was more kind of chemistry based in terms of understanding different liquids and acids and alkalines and all the different things that
so this is
make up chemistry.
Yeah, but I know. But when you dig into things, and alchemy tends to point us in the direction that everything's connected to a degree. And when you dig into things like physics and chemistry and stuff like that, there's crossovers in there that do show you that everything is connected, you know, the way that chemical reactions work and, you know, the way that physics needs to you know, you need to have a rough understanding of physics to understand exactly what's going on inside an atom and a molecule and things like that. It's quite interesting in the way that these things do intertwine and do interconnect.
Sure.
And then chemistry is very much involved in biology, and you know, and even physics these days, if you believe, you know, current concepts that microtubules are quantum enabled and could be the seat of consciousness, you know. So we've got physics, biology, and chemistry all working together inside our bodies to either be a receiver or a transmitter of information. And everything is connected in that respect. And that then takes us into the metaphysical realm, doesn't it? And alchemy seems to me to encompass it all, you know, both physical and metaphysical.
Yes, absolutely it does. And I think the metaphysical side of it is actually really interesting, because this whole notion of turning lead into gold, actually, you could think of it as a metaphor for what the Buddhists would call achieving enlightenment, and the stages that are used to process it. So there's some similarities between the alchemists' kind of search, their attempt to turn base metals into gold, and this notion that humans can achieve something outside of themselves. And I mean, parallels between what am I trying to say? There's essentially the Buddhists say there's 4 stages to enlightenment, and alchemists say there's 4 stages of turning lead into gold.
Oh, like calcification and putrefaction and all that kind of stuff.
Purification and And I mean, the metaphor is, it's actually pretty close. And when you're thinking about turning a sort of base level human into an enlightened Buddha, because the whole point about Buddhism is that Buddha himself was just the first person to achieve enlightenment. Buddha never said that nobody else could do it. And Buddha never said that he was any different from anybody else. He just had a certain practice and followed certain rules and achieved what he achieved, assuming he actually achieved it. It's not just some fairy tale that everyone's been told. And the process, well, the process in theory can be replicated by anybody if you go through the same stages and you purify yourself and you let go of attachment and all this kind of thing that is involved in seeking enlightenment. And there's plenty of Buddhist monks out there who are trying that exact thing. And then when you come to the alchemists, it strikes me that they're very much about seeking knowledge and improving themselves. And the physical stuff, it's kind of it's almost a side effect of the search. It's not, the aim is not to transform these metals. The aim is to improve one's knowledge and expand one's knowledge. I think.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's an awful lot to cover in alchemy, and McNeil's TV says this is a good one. Never thought about alchemy before. It's quite. When you think about alchemy, the first thing that springs to mind is turning lead into gold, and really nobody's done that. Nobody managed it, and for good reason, because I don't think you can turn lead into gold very easily. You need to use some. You need to be able to manipulate atoms.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, all matter is constructed from the base set of things. And so perhaps in some kind of advanced science using techniques or a catalyst or something else which interacts with the lead and turns it into gold. Yeah. But I don't see how. I just don't see how you can convert one metal to another.
Well, you can do that. I mean, because metals do that to a degree. Things, especially ones that are radioactive. But I mean, you think about uranium and stuff like that with half-lives. It eventually decays, and lead seems to be the product of a lot of these these metals that have half-lives. But Robin keeps going on about turning copper to bronze. I thought bronze was an alloy. I may be completely wrong here.
No, bronze is an alloy.
So you don't turn copper to bronze. You merge copper and what?
It's like stainless steel is a similar analogy. You're mixing other metals and other substances together, and you're creating something new. And that's effectively what bronze is, because copper on its own is too soft.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure off the top of my head. Let me just double check what it's mixed with, but I think it's copper and tin, if I'm not mistaken. But let me just double check online.
I'm sure Brock will tell you.
Yeah, no, making bronze. To make bronze, you can combine molten copper and tin in a 3-to-1 ratio.
There you go.
4 bronze ingots.
There you go.
No, it's all about bloody computer game, but it's copper and tin to create something stronger. It's one of the reasons why the Cornish tin mines were so in so much demand.
Yeah, and
why tin is it's a fairly valuable metal. That's kind of different. Is that I don't think. That's more chemistry than alchemy. Alchemy is actually transforming. That would be saying taking copper and transforming it into platinum or
I know what you mean. Because you're not combining metals in alchemy. You're transmutation, I think, is the word you're looking for. You're mutating it from one form to another. But did it really happen? Is it just people trying to do it and guessing that they maybe could, or fooling themselves in some cases? With the turning silver forks into gold forks and things like that. But
certainly there is bound to be an element of that. I mean, it gets more interesting with Nicholas Flamel because he was
tell me about Nicholas Flamel.
well,
That's a cracking name, isn't it? Well,
yeah, absolutely. And he's also features in Harry Potter as well.
You can just see him wearing a hat and a dashing cloak.
Yeah.
You really can. My name's Nicholas Flamel.
Well, supposedly in Harry Potter, he's so old that his skin is nearly translucent, and it's pretty much just a wisp of a thing. But he was an actual French scribe. He lived between 1330 and 1418. And he's a French scribe and manuscript seller who, according to legend, discovered the secret of the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah.
His life story became a legend with numerous tales of his supposed immortality due to alchemy. And he's a fascinating character because he was certainly, from what we can tell, he was absolutely a real person.
Yeah.
But I don't think he ever actually claimed to have invented the Philosopher's Stone. It seems to have been something that was attributed to him afterwards. And I don't know. It's like when people become legends, you have these really smart people who, it's like Tesla is a great modern day example of that, because he basically was able to do all sorts of things, certainly at the time, that were completely mind-blowing. I mean, the things that he could do with electricity, and if you look at how people talk about Tesla now, I think they ascribe more to him than he actually necessarily did. I mean, because the death ray was only ever a rumor. But at the same time, he's become as much of a legend as he was a real person.
Did you hear the one about when he started his vibration machine in his flat, and he had to turn it off because the whole block thought there was an earthquake happening? So I don't know if that's true or not, but it certainly makes a good story.
I don't know. The thing with Tesla that I've always found is that in his case, truth is actually stranger than fiction, because some of the things that he claimed, I mean, he claimed there's an infinite amount of energy that could be easily harnessed. And he talked about wireless transmission of power and things like that, which, I mean, now we have sort of wireless charging for our phones and things like that. But Tesla was actually talking about sending power over long distances wirelessly, which I don't even know how that works according to what we understand about electricity, or the idea that there's an infinite amount of electrical energy.
See, the problem is I don't think we don't properly understand what electricity is, because people think that when you turn on the switch, there's a flow of electricity. You know, like when you turn on the water, there's a flow of water, right? When you turn the tap on, water flows out. They think when you flick that switch, electricity flows along the wires, and that doesn't happen. You know, electrons don't move.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they vibrate, but they don't move. So the question is, how does electricity work? And it seems to be that electricity is almost more like a version of the electromagnetic spectrum than anything. You know, it's a field that's generated.
I think that makes sense.
So you don't what do you call it? You don't generate electricity as such. You realize it from magnetism and cables, and you know. I need to think it. I need to think it out before I start trying to explain this, because it wasn't on my radar at all. But I think electricity is a really complex thing, and this is the thing that this is the part where I go back into my rant about how can you meter something. You know, like you've got a meter that counts the amount of electricity that you use, okay, but nothing's connected back to the people that made that electricity. Because every time a cable goes into a transformer, for it to increase or decrease the voltage, because those big power lines are like 440,000 volts or something, so they don't lose the power when they transfer them. So they're really high voltage, very low ampage, right? And then it goes into a transformer that steps it down, and eventually, when it comes to your house, it's at 240 volts. Now it's been through 3 or 4 transformers. You are not physically connected. The cables you have in your house are not physically connected to the cables that produce that electricity, to the machines that produced it. Because when the transformers, the cables never touch. One field induces another field. So you've got a set of cables that go into a transformer like that, wrapped around a ferromagnetic core or whatever. And then the other side's got the same thing, maybe with less turnings or whatever. So this one will produce higher voltage than that one, or vice versa, right? And what happens is these cables don't touch. They just a different version of electricity, i.e., higher voltage or lower voltage and higher ampage, is materialized in these cables from this cable, And that's
absolutely, and
that's
all,
just
all
weird.
I want to say is that, can you imagine being some poor hapless minion of an energy company that has Sergeant Grumpy on the phone to you, trying to explain why he doesn't have to pay his electricity bill because the fucking cables aren't actually connected, and who the hell are you to be billing me for this thing?
But that's it. I mean, you've seen people with fluorescent tubes.
Mm-hmm.
You go and stick them in the ground underneath a power line and the tube will light up.
Yeah.
Because it's earthed on one end and it's picking up electricity that's induced, by these cables. So the electricity in the cables is inducing a field that the actual tube can light up. And is that stealing electricity? Is it?
Yeah, I
is it?
No, I mean, it's kind of splitting hairs.
The
way that our capitalist system works would say yes, because you're not paying for it. And so it's being produced and you're using it, but you're not paying for it. So you're a bad person.
So Jedi says he was taught it's free electron travel, and it's not, Jedi. That's the thing. Electrons don't travel freely in metals. People think they do, but they don't. You can't have that, or atoms would fall apart. That's not how things work.
Well, it's almost like a field that exists
between a field.
Electrons, and it's like the way that the power is transformed in a transformer.
Yeah.
Through the field, it's almost like cables work on a smaller scale of that, and you have this field that is generated between all of the electrons, and the electrons don't move, but they're all connected together through this electrical field. It's absolutely fascinating.
This is why I think electricity is not properly understood. I mean, I'm not trying to say I understand how electricity works, but I kind of understand how it doesn't work, and it doesn't work the way that we're taught.
I think when we're thinking about alchemy, I think this is exactly the sort of conversation how alchemy got started in the first place, is people wondering about the world around them. And I'm not necessarily saying electricity, because if we're talking about ancient Sumeria, then there's no, apart from the Baghdad battery, there's no evidence of widespread use of electricity in ancient Sumeria or ancient Egypt or anything like that. But it's conversations like this of people seeing, I don't know, looking at a river and trying to understand what's happening with the water. Why does water move in a particular direction? Or any of those sorts of questions. Why does meat spoil, for example? And you sit down, and initially you might have one person wondering it, and it's almost like people with too much time on their hands. And I mean, actually, if you look at a lot of scientists, they were like artists. They had patrons, and they'd have someone paying the bills because they were interested in the research or whatever.
Yeah.
but it's I don't know, people with too much time on their hands wondering about the natural world. I mean, in the case of Nicholas
It's not kind of
Flamel,
us.
well, that was the point I was trying to make. That was exactly the point I was trying to make. Is that
Yeah.
it's because science is as much a state of mind as it is a physical discipline. It's a way of examining the world and asking questions, and a framework for trying to understand the world,
Mhm.
which is one of the things that I think that alchemy gave. That's one of the reasons you could say it's the originator of science, because it's a methodology as much as an outcome. It's a way of doing things rather than, or a way of thinking about things and being curious, which is something that humans just naturally are.
Yeah.
We are curious creatures. And so when you see things happening around you, it's like lightning, for example. There'll be one type of person who sees lightning and is absolutely shit scared and doesn't understand and thinks the gods are angry with them and everything else.
Mhm.
And then there'll be another type of person who finds the lightning fascinating and wants to try and understand it. And so embarks on this journey of attempting to understand what lightning is, and probably ends up getting electrocuted in a lightning storm because what was it? Was it Benjamin Franklin or
Yeah, the
someone?
kite. Yeah.
With the kite in the lightning storm trying to.
I saw a video. I saw a video today on YouTube. Not on YouTube, on Twitter, and a guy got struck by lightning. Right, and I mean, it knocked him flat. Okay, this is on like a security cam, and the guy's walking. He's it's obviously a thunderstorm going on, and he's kind of hunched down and he's moving forward. And the next thing, bang, lightning hits him, and you can see the mark left in the ground. You know where the heat was transferred. So the guy goes down like a sack of tatties. He just goes bang, and then he moves, and he eventually gets up, or he turns around and sits up. And I'm thinking that was lucky. Then he stands up, takes 3 steps, and gets hit by another bolt.
That's God's way of saying stay down.
Don't get up, mate.
That's crazy.
And apparently,
I mean,
apparently survived both of them. Yeah.
And they're always thinking lightning doesn't strike twice. Clearly does sometimes.
Yeah. Oh.
And lightning is fascinating.
And Matthew Blackman does say you have overlooked the Dendera light bulb in Egypt.
That's a fair point.
I was actually thinking about it, Matthew, but I didn't want to interrupt Ed, because I'm quite considerate that way.
Oh dear! But this is the point: is that we find the Dendera light bulb,
the
Baghdad battery. We see evidence that ancient people had a concept of. They must have had a concept of electricity, or some of them at least. And now, does that class as alchemy? I kind of think it does.
I think alchemy covers almost everything, really, because it's actually the study of everything to a degree, because you're looking at everything as if it's connected, and when you really start digging into things, everything does seem to be connected.
Certainly, certainly the smaller we get, because originally we didn't have a concept of an atom, and then they realized that there are these things called atoms and electrons, and protons and things like that. Then you get smaller, and you're in the quantum realm, and one has to wonder what's smaller than the quantum realm. Is there something else? Because to say categorically no,
string theory. String theory would be smaller than the quantum, wouldn't it? Because string theory, but string theory's kind of losing its way. I think string theory's dead duck.
It may well be. I mean, it's kind of way over my head in terms of trying to actually understand it. The point being is that every time we think we've found what constitutes existence, what makes up reality, what are the building blocks? And originally we thought the building blocks were atoms, and now we're not so sure because we've got the whole quantum realm. And then the question is, what's beyond that? Because if we were wrong about atoms, then we may well be wrong about quantum particles.
We almost certainly are. Don't you think?
Well, yeah. And then you get to the point where once you get down so small,
yeah,
it's like with quantum physics. Some of the things that happen in the quantum realm are completely defy any kind of explanation, non-local quantum causality and all this kind of thing. And then you get the scientists who've explored quantum physics and come up with theories like the multiverse, and in all seriousness say that every decision that we make, it spawns an infinite number of different possibilities, and each one of those exists in a separate universe. So
I used to like that. I used to like that theory. I've kind of moved away from it because I have my new theory of time.
John's right. So John's unitary theory of time. Okay.
Yeah, because
go on in, Einstein. Tell us all about it.
I don't think the future exists.
It doesn't. The only thing that exists is the present moment.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as the future. There's no such thing as the past. There is only the eternal present.
So what you have to think about is, as you're riding, we're all surfers, right? We're all on the crest of a wave as it travels. And that moment at the crest of that wave is where we are in time. And that wave just keeps moving and we stay on it. And when we fall off, that's when we die.
Right. Okay. So.
But there is no future, so there's no chance of time travel. Because if future hasn't happened, you can't travel back in time.
Well, yeah.
You know?
If the only thing that exists is the present moment, then there is no past and there is no future, because the past was simply a present moment that existed before the current present moment, which doesn't exist anymore.
Then that leads us into, is this indeed a simulation? Because that's how a simulation would work.
If it's a simulation, then whoever created it we need to have a word with him in a dark alley with a baseball bat and a bottle of whiskey. Seriously.
The problem is, yeah. Well, see, this is why we should be looking to go a level down in the simulation, right? Because unless we are the very first simulation, the chances are that there will be simulations below us, right? So we need to go down in simulation to find out if we're a simulation. Because if we can go down in a simulation, the chances are we are in a simulation.
So you're basically Neo wanting to meet the architect.
Well, you see, no, because I don't think you can go up. It's like if you think you're in a computer program, right? How are you going to break up? You can go down, but how are you going to get out? You know what I mean?
Yeah, kind of.
We probably need more drink and a pub for this kind of conversation.
Well, this is the good thing about these sorts of conversations, because the possibilities are endless. I mean, it's interesting how so much of it is merged up with everything that we know. And I know that sounds a bit airy-fairy, but if you look at alchemy, one of the things I find fascinating about it is that it's everywhere.
Yeah.
and it's as much bound up with science, and it doesn't matter which scientific discipline we're talking about. You're always going to get some followers of that particular discipline of science who take their ideas to the next level, and sometimes those ideas get proven correct, as in the case of the people who theorized that atoms could be split, for example, and everyone else was telling them they're crazy, and they were like, no, we think we can do this. And people like Marie Curie, who dramatically shortened her own life in order to
Yeah.
kind of, and I mean, is that, would Marie Curie class as an alchemist? It's a genuine question.
Yeah, probably, actually, yeah. I mean, Isaac Newton classed himself as an alchemist, didn't he?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So maybe alchemy is actually trying to bridge the link between the physical and the non-physical worlds, in a way. That once you get to a certain point of understanding the physical world, the next logical step is to then try and understand the non-physical world, things like consciousness, because we don't understand consciousness in the same way we don't understand electricity.
Yeah, consciousness is. See, I have a theory about consciousness as well.
But could consciousness be electrical? Could it be some sort of field?
I think it could be a wave.
Right.
You know, like an electromagnetic
DNA. That DNA is actually some sort of antenna, and that our consciousness comes into our physical form through the antenna. And I mean, there's also the Eastern concept of chakras, which are the different energy centers through the body, which actually come out through the head, the top, the head chakra, the crown chakra, and then you create effectively this torus or toroidal energy field.
Is that like Corellian photography and stuff like that as well?
I guess so. I guess maybe that's what it's taking a picture of. But it's. I mean, we're electrical beings, and so humans have an electrical field in the same way that the planet has an electrical field, or that the solar system has an electrical field. Yeah. And all other living creatures have electrical fields as well, and these fields are constantly interacting. But then it's also what constitutes physical matter, because you've got atoms and stuff being held together by electrical charges, because that's what electrons are.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder. That's where when we're talking about everything being connected, maybe it's all connected through electricity of one form or another.
Well, I definitely think the electromagnetic force is the major force in the universe.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to be all airy-fairy and say love, but yeah. Well, I had to throw that in there. We're getting all a bit technical and scientific and ting.
I've kind of gone off.
Paracelsus, I mean, well, going back to Nicholas Flamel for a minute.
Yeah, go on. Let's get back on topic.
Went off on a little bit of a tangent.
A little bit of a journey. But, you know, if you were in the present, you were just surfing the wave.
Well, the thing about Flamel is that he is rumored to have developed the Philosopher's Stone, which, in addition to granting immortality,
right. So see, hold on.
Stone that allowed you to turn base metals into
hold on. When you say developed the Philosopher's Stone, did he come up with the idea? Are you saying he came up with the idea, or did you say he actually made a Philosopher's Stone?
No, I'm saying he's rumored to have created it, but
the Philosopher's Stone, does that not go way back to Hermes Trismegistus, or whatever his name is?
But
because isn't he the guy that's supposed to have? I mean, we've got the Hermetic egg. Have you heard of that? Yeah.
No.
Oh, the Hermetic egg, right. So this is based on Hermes Trismegistus Philosopher's Stone. This is how you create the Philosopher's Stone. You put stuff in this Hermetic egg, right? And then you put it through all the alchemical processes. Yeah, alchemical processes, like, you know, the what was the first one? Where the desiccated clarification or whatever they call it, and then you go through all these by producing heat and pressure on this hermetic egg, which has the necessary products to create the Philosopher's Stone inside it, and you treat it in this way, and then at the end of it you get the Philosopher's Stone, which, strangely enough, is thought to be either a red powder or a red liquid. So it's not an actual stone.
Well, why the bloody hell call it a stone? I mean, supposedly Flamel actually discovered a stone of some kind that could be used to extend life, but also it was the stone that was almost a catalyst for turning base metals into gold.
Yeah.
But the thing about Flamel is that a lot of the stories and legends about him actually started. I mean, this whole Philosopher's Stone thing started a long time after he died. And there's no evidence that Flamel himself actually claimed to have created a Philosopher's Stone or done any of the sort of alchemical things. But supposedly he got the knowledge that he got through a book, apparently written by someone called Abraham the Jew. And the book was said to contain the alchemical secrets that he then started experimenting with. And he's said to have spent 21 years deciphering it, eventually traveling to Spain to seek help from a Jewish scholar who helped him understand the text. And the legend claims that through the knowledge from this book, Flamel succeeded in creating the stone, but there's no actual historical evidence that he ever did. Not that he was involved, nor that he was involved in alchemy, nor that he achieved immortality. He did live to the ripe old age of 80, which back in those days was pretty unusual.
Well, it? See, and I'm sorry to interject there, because if you've ever seen my graveyard walks, right, I walked around the graveyard here and looked at the deaths of people, and most of them did live to be in their 70s and 80s. Most of them had good long lives.
We're talking about 500 years ago?
Yeah, because I've got graves up there that are from the 1300s, mate. Right. So the thing is, these people did live good long lives if you managed to get past childhood.
Right.
That was the problem. Infant mortality was through the roof, and that's why the average life expectancy 500 years ago is something like 40. Most people didn't die when they were 40. Most died when they were 60 or 70 or 80, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we do now. But an incredible amount of kids died in childhood, and that brings down the average life expectancy.
Yeah.
And that kind of does work. I mean, I suspected this, and having walked around the graveyard and talked about it, it kind of vindicates it. I should probably go and do another one in a different graveyard, but I've been...
whatever floats your boat.
Do you ever walk around the graveyard? Have you ever walked around the graveyard?
Not unless I'm in a churchyard for some reason, and I don't really go to church, so no.
I think graveyards usually pretty peaceful. There's something... I don't find them creepy at all.
Everyone's dead, John.
Well, that's because I don't like people. That's it. The only good people are dead people.
Oh, he finally said it.
Oh, so yeah, but yeah, no.
But anyway, maybe not living. Maybe him not living to the ripe old age of 80 was particularly unusual. Fair enough. But his reputation. He was a scientist and a scribe and a scholar, certainly. But all of this stuff that he's supposed to have done somehow springs up after his death, and that's why I made the comparison with Tesla, because there's a bunch of stuff that Tesla actually did, as amazing as it is, and that's not to detract from what he actually did.
Right, hold on. Sorry, I need to fucking interrupt you because I just fucking posted something being smart in the chat, telling Matthew I liked something just as he managed to post a thing saying he used to sleep in a graveyard when he was homeless. I wasn't meaning I like the fact that you slept in a graveyard, Matthew. I was talking about the universe as an alien child science experiment, but
being
fuck
homeless is bad enough. Really
tell me about it.
Anyone that's homeless, but being homeless and sleeping in a graveyard, that's
people do that. People do that though because they don't get they don't get pistoled that much.
Well, unless the whole thing is full of ghosts and
you got to be careful as well because graveyards and certainly in big cities, a lot of junkies and people like that use them.
Yeah, well, it's not. I don't know. I've had enough encounters with death in my life that I don't need to go seeking it out. But I don't know. I just think that there's legends, and then there's what people were actually like. And for someone that lived he was born in 1418, so middle of the 15th century, roughly. It's a bloody long time ago, and who knows what anyone was really like back then. I mean, we have stories and things like that, but where does the fact stop and fiction begin is the question.
Indeed.
And I think that's a lot of there's a lot of that in alchemy, that there's this mixture of things that people actually did and what we would think of as scientific discoveries and scientific investigation. And then there's a lot of stuff that's ascribed to them, which seems fantastical. And who knows whether they did it or not. I'll go back to the example of Tesla. There's the stuff we know Tesla did. Mm-hmm. And then if you go onto the internet, there's a whole bunch of stuff that is ascribed to Tesla, but there's no actual evidence that Tesla ever did or built or invented certain things. And then the government kind of throws a veil over it by confiscating loads of his research and his papers and stuff. And so we're not going to know. And nature abhors a vacuum. So people are going to make up stories.
Yeah, of course.
And maybe that's what happened with people like Flamel, is you have a really smart guy that kind of pushes forward the boundaries of scientific knowledge, and the people around him, frankly, don't understand it. And in the same way that it's what Arthur C. Clarke said, that any sufficiently advanced technology would appear as magic to people who weren't as advanced. And if you have someone like Tesla or Flamel, who's essentially ahead of their time in a way, mm-hmm. The people around them would potentially start rumors. You know what people are like about talking about other people behind their back, especially when the person is slightly nerdy and kind of super smart and they don't really understand what he does or what he talks about or anything like that. And rumors start in pubs and suddenly you're inventing philosopher's stones. And I don't know, maybe it was just maybe the whole philosopher's stone thing was just a story started in an ale house or something by people who, I don't know, maybe it was Flamel's cleaners or something like that.
I think the philosopher's stone goes back. I think it goes back to Egypt even. I don't think it just started in the medieval times.
No, I don't think it does either. But Flamel was attributed.
He popularized it.
Well, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, is that you have certain scientists who seem to capture the popular imagination.
Yeah.
And other scientists who actually achieve more, relatively speaking,
Yeah.
who nobody's ever heard about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because you get people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Cox and folk like that who too are very much in the public eye, and yet the people really making a difference you never hear about, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also, it's that, because the people who are really making a difference don't want to be on television and don't give a shit about television. They just want to do their research and write their papers and do their stuff rather than do whatever it is that Neil deGrasse Tyson supposedly does.
Well, he's the director of the Hayden Planetarium, isn't he?
Yeah, and a jab pusher extraordinaire. and listening to him, I saw an interview. Del Bigtree did an interview with him, and he just comes across.
Careful now.
I'm just going to say, he just comes across as completely unhinged. They don't like being questioned. This is the problem. They think that they have the answers. This is the problem with science these days, generally, or a certain class of scientists who have a lot of power. Yeah, that's true. No, it applies to people. It's not just scientists.
People need to be able to say, "Yeah, I don't know." You know, and I mean, I've said it a couple of times already tonight that I don't know. I don't know how electricity really works. You know, I don't know how the sun really works. I mean, people talk about it being fusion and a big gas ball, but I'm not convinced. Because it just seems it doesn't all add up the way it is. It could be a plasma node and an electrical current, you know.
I think in a way it's actually more important to be able to admit when you don't know something than it is when you do know something.
Yeah, I think
that intellectual honesty is, I think that's actually the mark of a proper scientist. Anyone who claims to have all the answers, like a certain class of scientists who will remain nameless. I can think of a few names that would
don't
fit in that book.
Call them out, mate. Call them out.
Well, we've got people like Michael Mann, Flint Dibble.
Michael Mann's not a scientist, is he?
Well, he claims to be. Flint Dibble claims to be an archaeologist, but these people are just narrative. They're just narrative monkeys. They're people who they have a certain narrative that they're being paid money to promote, or they're completely invested in psychologically or whatever. That they think they have the answer, and they won't brook any challenging to their answers. And whether that's because they're invested in it financially because they're making loads of money out of it, or whether they're invested in it emotionally because they've built their entire career on this particular belief structure. And if you come across, it's like if you're an archaeologist and you build your entire career on the basis that human civilization is 6,000 years old, and then suddenly you're confronted with irrefutable proof that it's more than 6,000 years old and that it's potentially much, much older, then the intellectually honest thing to do is to say, damn, it looks like we got that wrong. We've got to rethink everything, and we've got to dive in and actually excavate Göbekli Tepe.
You're right. And I've got to give Leonard Susskind, I've got to give him kudos. Because he's basically sitting there he must be well into his 70s now, right? Well into, maybe even in his 80s. But he's sitting there basically saying that everything he has worked on is probably wrong. And when someone can turn around and do that, right, after your whole life's work, and say, yeah, I got it wrong, I probably got it wrong.
That's a proper scientist.
Yeah, that is.
In my opinion. I mean, that is proper intellectual honesty. And it's the ones who know deep down that they're wrong, but for whatever reason can't let go of that because it's so much part of their identity. I mean, if you look at Flint Dibble is a great example of that. In this whole back and forth hoo-ha he's had with Graham Hancock. and he was on the Joe Rogan show. And there's a great account on Twitter called Illegitimate Scholar, who's done a whole bunch of brilliant takedowns of everything that Flint Dibble said that was inaccurate. And the point is, ultimately, if you're a proper scientist, you have to be prepared to entertain the notion that the entire way that you thought the universe worked was wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And unless you're prepared to do that, we're talking about science. We're talking about dogma and religion, not science.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot, yeah, it's dogma though these days, isn't it? Really?
It unfortunately, it really seems to be that way. And the thing is that, but in a way, it's always been like that. If you look at the great scientific discoveries that have happened in the past, they almost never come from the center. They never come from the mainstream. It's always the outliers. It's the Marie Curies and people who think outside the box, and usually, quite often, when they're alive, get absolutely pilloried for it by the mainstream. And then 50 years after they die, oh yeah, it turns out they were right after all. Sorry, our bad. It's like, yeah, we
Copernicus, Galileo.
Yeah. Giordano Bruno, Paul Buster got burned at the stake.
Yep.
I mean, it's like, oh shit, our bad.
Sorry.
Yeah, we made a mistake. Oh no, what was it they said after the Rona? Mistakes were made on both sides.
Yeah.
There's a brilliant Bob Moran cartoon from back in the day with this New England witch hunter person, and this witch burning at the stake, and he just has this scroll saying, "Oh, mistakes were made on both sides."
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it's like. And then when you factor in that witch hunting that will happen from people who disagree with you or have a vested interest in a particular theory being true, like climate scientists, for example, when you go against that, you feel their wrath. And that, to me, that's not science. That's not saying that we're just going to throw this idea into the pot and we'll try and prove it wrong. No, you're not allowed to throw that idea into the pot because that's the wrong kind of idea. We don't like those ideas in this pot.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you not think, when you look at the world today, and I mean, do you not think it's kind of falling into, it's almost as if we're falling into a new dark ages?
It feels like that. It really does feel like that. Yeah. Certainly where science is concerned.
Yeah.
And actually where the ability because it's not just about science, but it's actually about people feeling like they have an ability to ask questions. And for me, the Dark Ages is very much about, I like the Dark Ages analogy, actually, because I obviously didn't live through the previous Dark Ages, but
not unless you are you really Nicholas Flamel?
God, I hope not. I would not want to be immortal.
You've had a haircut, haven't you?
Yes.
I thought so. You're looking incredibly young. Either that, or you've been up in the attic and touched up your picture.
No.
that probably goes over most people's heads these days. Do you remember that? The picture of Dorian Gray.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
where
like I made
ages and he doesn't.
I made a joke on Twitter today because I've never seen that movie, Schindler's List. Right? I've never seen the movie. Okay. And I said, somebody said something about it, and I said, I've never seen the movie, but I've used these lifts.
You're just so tactless sometimes.
But
Jesus.
hey, you see, the problem is you can't use that joke if you're an American because they don't call them lifts, they call them elevators. So it doesn't work. And all the Americans will be like that as it flies over their heads, just like drones, which are actually airplanes.
You're going to get burned at the stake one day. You know that,
Probably.
don't you?
I don't fancy that at all.
No.
So artifacting reality, if you want to apply, so if you want to reply so the name comes up, what you have to do is you have to type the name properly, like maybe Julie C, or even type less of the name, and sometimes it'll pop up in the wee box, and then you click the wee box, and that'll put the name in and make it all colourful. Just some YouTube advice there. Yeah, Gunky Fadgets gets it. Ed's got a beautiful picture of himself in the attic, but he's been nasty about it.
I don't even have an attic.
Yeah, I know. I had a flat once, and I had an attic. Well, it was a top flat, certainly, but
there is a roof
space.
But apart from anything else, it's not part of my leasehold. And the little hatch to get up there is so small that you couldn't use it as an attic space because you wouldn't get anything up there.
Okay. But yeah. So here's some quotes that capture the essence of alchemy, right? The great tragedy of the concept of alchemy was the transmutation of metals. So Raymond Lully said that, and he was highlighting that this is not the key to esoteric alchemy. And I think he was right. The transmutation of metal, I mean, we've talked about this. The transmutation of metals was something that everybody jumps on, but nobody's ever done it. And alchemy is a lot more than just the transmutation of metals. In fact, alchemy is quite a fascinating subject. And strangely enough, I was talking to my son about it today because we were up at the van clearing some stuff out it. And he goes, I studied a bit of alchemy. And I goes, what? Because he's like obsessed with Pokemon and, you know, playing games and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, what? You studied alchemy? And I goes, well, when? And he goes, well, I was quite interested in it. And it was him that came up with the Arceus thing.
Mm-hmm.
Arceus thing. And I'm like, what? I was gobsmacked. Absolutely gobsmacked. So, next quote. That alchemical transmutation was impossible unless the alchemist himself was in the process of transformation. Paracelsus said that, emphasizing inner change.
Well, I think that's, to me, that's the key part about it. I think that the whole gold, the lead to gold thing is a metaphor. And I actually think that it's one of those things that transforming lead into gold was jumped on by people, by the detractors, effectively, who are trying to cast aspersions on the metaphysical transformation of the individual from metaphorical lead to metaphorical gold.
Exactly.
And they wanted to discourage other people from knowing about that and from exploring it themselves, potentially the church, because you have to remember that particularly when people like Nicholas Flamel were alive, the church was the source of knowledge. And if you went against church teachings, you were going to get into a lot of trouble.
Well, here's one. Here's a quote that will just emphasize that one. Man, which means men and women, human beings, are divine beings, not lower than the angels, higher than the angels.
I think that's true. I don't think death is the end. I think it's a stage on a journey. I think consciousness is a non-local phenomena. I don't think consciousness emanates from us. I think we're a
receiver.
We're a receiver, a vessel
of the
consciousness. And that consciousness is something else that perhaps when we're in between our mortal existences, assuming that we reincarnate, that in that in-between space is potentially where we exist as energy or pure consciousness or something.
We've talked
And
about
that
this
maybe we
before.
rejoin the field. Don't know.
We've talked about this before, and there are some theories that say that while here you feel an individual, but when you're finished, you're back into the overall consciousness as such. But yeah,
I think the only reason that we actually feel like individuals when we're in this existence is because of our five senses. Because when we're in this meat sack, we're limited to touch, taste, sound, smell, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And that because of that, and because we're kind of chunked off into this meat sack, effectively conscious meat sack, sentient meat sack, even.
Would you stop saying meat sack? People are going to be pissed.
Well, I
drinking game.
Oh dear! Everyone has to have a drink every time Ed says meat sack. But the point is that consciousness has always seemed to me to be something bigger than just the body or this life or this planet or whatever. There's something else there that maybe we're not supposed to understand it. Certainly not in our mortal form.
Or do you think that we don't understand it because we're not far enough along the journey?
That's possible. Yeah, I mean that's entirely possible. That maybe the whole point is to keep coming back until you get to that state of enlightenment where you don't need to keep coming back because you've learned all of the lessons that the universe is seeking to teach you, or all of the lessons that are required, that you're required to learn before you can move to the next evolutionary step or something.
Here's a question for you, and if you don't want to answer it, don't answer it. But if you got to the point where there was a choice, would you come back or would you move on?
Would I come back as me, or would I?
No, because when you come back, you've got to take the draft of forgetfulness, right?
Yeah, so that makes sense because you wouldn't be able to exist as a human and achieve anything if you could remember all of your past lives.
Exactly.
You would just it's like every person you ever fell in love with over the course of 1,000 years of reincarnation. And also, the other interesting question is, how many times do you reincarnate?
Well, because that's the question.
Hundreds of thousands of years.
But some people might be held back,
Sure. And also, is the source of consciousness, does it apply to the universe? Is it something that it just exists on our planet or in our solar system? Or the reason I'm asking, or the reason I'm suggesting this is, can you be reincarnated on a totally different planet from Earth, for example? Mm-hmm. Do we have past lives or future lives that might be on Alpha Centauri or wherever?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Which is fascinating in itself when you actually stop to think about it.
So, what do you think? Would you come back or not? Would you roll the dice, or would you move?
Well, I would not want to roll dice. I would want. If it happens, I want to be a bit more discerning about.
Oh, you want to be able to choose?
Yeah, I think so. Because that's the whole thing about the Buddhahood. That once you reach the state of enlightenment, one of the theories in Buddhism is that you then your spiritual self is in such a state when you die that the whole process of death is not this scary, massive wrench, and that instead of just kind of bumbling around the afterlife and then being reincarnated just randomly, that you actually have some control over who and where you're reincarnated and as what. Because if there's reincarnation, I think it would be fun. I mean, if we get multiple lives and we can reincarnate and we can keep coming back, I think it'd be fun to have a life as a dolphin or a whale or a shark or a crocodile or a bird or something. That would be fun. But then do we have higher levels? It's like, do you start off incarnating as an amoeba and then your next life you incarnate as a jellyfish, and then your next life you incarnate as a grouper, and then a shark, and then a monkey, and then I don't know. Do you move up? And if that's the case, what comes after people? I mean, if each reincarnation is a step up some sort of ladder, and that we reincarnate from one creature to another until we get to a point where, I don't know, that our consciousness is developed enough that we become something more sentient, like a human, or maybe a dolphin. I don't know. Do dolphins consider these sorts of questions? I mean, what do whales talk about when they're singing to each other? Because I mean, are they having a conversation? Is that are they discussing current affairs or whale philosophy or?
I don't know. I really don't know. It's tricky. I mean, dolphins have got massive brains.
Mm-hmm.
But you probably find that a lot of that brain power goes to decoding sonar, you know?
It's possible, but I mean, elephants have big brains too. And
Yeah.
elephants are surprisingly...
but per size of the beast, dolphins have really big brains. You know?
True. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But then look at things like ravens. Tiny brains. Tiny brains. But birds are pretty smart.
Absolutely. That's something that's always fascinated me, that you can have creatures that you would think that brain is much too small.
The what do you call it?
Kind of,
it's like not the capacity, but the what do you call it? Like the rate of use of your brain in a bird is much higher than in a human.
Yeah.
So a bird's brain is more active and uses more of it than a human does.
Well, this is another thing about humans
humans have got a big brain, so we outrank birds, you know, because even though we're only using it at 10, it's like driving a Ferrari and only using 10% of the throttle, you know, whereas a bird's in a mini metro and it's flat out.
But is that because 10% is used for consciousness and 90% is used for keeping the body alive and doing all the things that our brain is doing in the background?
The automatic stuff's nothing.
But then, why would we not evolve to use the maximum available brain power?
Good question.
Because I mean,
good question.
10% for some people seems to be
optimistic. I was just throwing figures. I was just throwing figures.
Well, no, it's 10%. It is roughly.
But
it is roughly 10%.
Have you seen the guy that didn't have a brain? Basically, the cerebral spinal fluid filled most of his head, and his brain was like this much around the outside of his, the inside of his skull. So he only had a teeny brain, right? And yet he was living a perfectly normal, healthy life as a perfectly normal, functioning human being.
Well, I mean, so what's the extra brain being used for? If we don't actually need it, what's it there for? And
don't know.
Why is it?
Don't know.
Is it switched off? And how does that make sense from an evolutionary perspective? Given that,
this wasn't an evolutionary thing. This was some kind of problem.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about humans generally. That why, when we're actually physically quite weak compared to a lot of other animals, we don't have claws, we don't have big sharp teeth.
We do have big brains,
but we have got big brains. But then Mother Nature, in its infinite wisdom, decides, oh no, you can only use 10% of that.
Well, do you think
What the
maybe
fuck is
that?
that all about?
Do you think maybe that you ever been in an accident or been in a fight or been in a situation where your life's almost threatened and everything slows down because your brain goes into overdrive, and it is like bullet time in the Matrix?
I can't say I've ever been in a situation like that.
Okay, because if you get into a life-threatening situation, it seems to me that everything fucking slows down. You have so much time to make decisions. It's bizarre. I remember, I was howling down a road one night. We were going to a call. We were doing about 100 mile an hour on a country road, and I was young, stupid, and it was icy, and I thought I had everything under control, and I didn't, right? And we're howling down this road. We're doing 100 mile an hour in a police car, and the road has a 90-degree bend at the end of it, okay? It's this massive straight. And I'm looking at the bend, and I'm thinking, and I'd already touched the brakes, and the car wasn't slowing down because the road was just a sheet of ice. And I'm looking at the bend, and I'm seeing there's a lamppost there. It's right on the centre of the road at the bend. The verges aren't looking great. I don't know what I'm going to be doing next. There's nothing coming, thankfully, and I can see across I have a look across the field. I can see across the field. So the road is completely clear, so there's no problem in taking to the wrong side of the road if I have to. But we're still, bear in mind, doing 100 mile an hour towards or maybe 90 by this point, towards what is a 90-degree corner. And I turns to the chap next to me, who is in a similar situation, right, looking at this. And I says, do you have any suggestions as to what we should do now? and he turns to me and says, I would try and avoid the lamppost.
Did you go airborne?
No, I didn't. I brought it down. What I did was I put two wheels onto the grass and just let the drag of the grass slow the car down. So eventually I got down to about 40 mile an hour and was able to make the corner. But it's just like everything goes into slow motion. It's like I was out one night, we were on a turn. A cop had been seriously injured in a pub, and the guy had a gun. He was supposed to be in a block of flats, and we were surrounding the block of flats. And I was at one door with a dog handler, and this guy came out the block of flats, and he looked. He had all the gear on and everything. He looked like the guy we were looking for, right? And he's walking across the road quite calmly, and I stands up and goes, "Armed police, freeze!" and the guy just went like that, and it was like slow motion. He went and just stopped,
and then shat himself. Probably.
Yeah, well, probably. But it's like, see, when in these situations, you seem to have an incredible amount of time to make decisions. Now, if you're doing the same thing in training, right, when you're using blanks or whatever, or using even laterally with the projection screen and the laser gun, even when you're doing it in training, you don't get that. It's only in real life. It's really...
that just speaks to the power of the human mind. I mean, it kind of ties into everything that we've been talking about. The brain is so much more powerful than we think it is. I mean, if you compare the electrical connections in the brain with electrical connections in the world's telephone network, the complexity level is, it's about a P. The complexity of the world's networks is a little P compared to the human brain, like life size.
Yeah.
It's absolutely phenomenal. And we don't use as much of it as we could. Now, is that an evolutionary thing? Is it? It's say maybe in 1,000 years, assuming people don't murder themselves into extinction, will humans evolve to use more of their brains?
Was
Or is this something that can be switched on through meditation? Or
was my point, and maybe I didn't get it across properly, was maybe that capacity is there for emergencies.
right? Okay. Mhm.
Maybe it's just there for that point when it's, sink or swim,
But that okay. No, I can accept. I can accept that as a rational argument. My counterpoint would be: isn't 90% a bit excessive? Maybe you would
Well,
have
but
80%
remember,
that you use normally, and then 20% that.
I flung that 10% out there, mate. I don't know if that's right or not. I just flung that out there as a number.
No, I think it is. I think it is roughly correct.
Oh, is it? All right, okay.
Yeah, in
that's
terms
worrying.
of how much of our actual brain power that we use. But then there's also all sorts of stories about humans that have abilities like extrasensory perception,
Mm-hmm.
in some cases telepathy. They say that our brains are actually capable of being telepathic, but it's just not switched on.
Yeah.
Now, my question is that has it been somehow switched off deliberately through our upbringing, and that the powers that be at some point decided that it was too much power for people to have? Is that something that perhaps the universe has said, you can have all that power, but you have to learn how to use it? Because if you just start off being super powerful, then you're not necessarily going to use it responsibly, and that doesn't work evolutionarily speaking, because you just end up destroying each other. Or is it something that has to be earned? Is it through, I don't know, meditation or certain practices or herbs or certain knowledge that you can acquire, which allows you to switch on more of your brain?
So, see, when you're doing things during the day or working away, how much do you think that you're using your brain or just concentrating on the task? So I like, how sometimes, like, we're sitting here just now and we're talking about these things and we're really thinking, right? We're really thinking just now, I would say, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're using quite a bit of brain power at the moment. But say you were out, like, I don't know, cutting the grass. How much thinking are you doing, or are you just cutting the grass?
Well, that's a good question. My analogy would be driving, because when you
Oh, yeah, right, okay.
when you're first learning to drive,
Yeah,
you have to think about everything.
Yep.
You have to think about what gear you're in.
yep,
You have to think about when to change gear. You have to think about everything going on around you. Particularly if you're doing your driving lessons, you have to think of the
Mhm.
fucking driving instructor sitting next to you, like looking over your shoulder and judging you and judging you and judging you. And then, but once you actually
yeah,
have done the test and you're driving on your own,
yeah,
after a certain amount of time, all of the things that you had to think about
they're automatic.
are automatic. You're not
Mhm.
thinking about, but at some point, the thing is that you're not thinking about it consciously,
Mhm.
but on some level, your brain is still working, because
Well,
there's
obviously,
something.
yeah.
I mean, whether it's the sound of the engine that tells you that you need to change gear, or the sound of the engine
Yeah.
that lets you know what gear you're in roughly, or
And
the
it's
things that you're seeing
yeah,
around you.
it's a great analogy, Ed, because there comes a point in your driving career when you've just driven 20 miles and you're thinking to yourself, what the fuck happened in those last 20 miles? Because I can't recollect anything I just did.
Hmm.
Because you've done it on autopilot, haven't you?
Yeah, but also when you think, particularly in the case of driving, you've actually managed to control this big piece of
Mhm.
metal doing 70 miles an hour,
Yeah.
and you've been completely conscious the whole way. You
Yeah.
haven't hit anyone. You've not
Yep.
caused any accidents. You followed all the traffic rules. You've done literally everything successfully, and yet your conscious mind
it's off doing
wasn't
something else.
even
Huh?
aware of doing it.
Yeah.
Your conscious mind is listening to some music or listening to the news on the radio or
Yeah.
whatever one does when one is driving. And on some level, your brain has learned how to do what it needs to do to operate that car in the background. Now, if doing something relatively complicated like that, because actually when you take back driving to when you were learning to drive,
Yeah, you were 100%
the whole thing was
on it.
fucking daunting. I mean, when you're learning to drive,
Eyes on stalks.
it's literally you, and you're terrified of everything. You're trying not to hit anything. You don't know. You're trying to judge.
Dude.
Another good example is judging distance in a car.
Yeah.
It's that you somehow the car becomes an extension of you.
Yeah, if you're a man.
Well, I think that's being unfair to women drivers because let's not disparage.
No, and no, I'm not going to disparage women drivers. There are biological limitations.
Because let's just be clear, there are bad men drivers and there are
Oh
bad
yeah, of course there are.
It's not about gender.
Well, it is on certain things because
CUNT on the road.
It is about certain things because women should not be driving at night. They just can't drive at night. That's the problem. They can't see.
I know. Actually, I actually know. I wouldn't say it's an exclusive rule because I do know some women that are completely comfortable driving at night. But
they may be comfortable, but they're probably not effective.
I know more women who are uncomfortable driving at night than men.
Well, of course you do because they have more rods than. They have more cones than rods.
But it's also, I think it might also be an age and a confidence thing because I know.
No, it's purely a visual thing. Right. It really is because they have more cones than rods. They're biologically wired to be able to see great in peripheral vision. That's why women catch men looking at women, but men don't catch women looking at guys because men are focused on the thing in front of them. Women have much better peripheral vision.
Well, it would make sense evolutionarily speaking.
Exactly. It does. Yeah, it does.
But then this goes back to the brain.
Mm-hmm.
My big question, and it kind of links into alchemy as well. Are these people like Nicholas Flamel and John Dees and all of these people who history says are alchemists, are they just people that have gotten to a point where they're somehow able to use a larger proportion of their brain than your average person?
Are they further along the journey?
Well, yeah. And is that something that happens naturally? It's like driving a car. That like car driving is a skill, and then once you do it, you can do it. You don't have to think about it, and you can move on to something else. Is that what these people achieved in their lives? That there were certain things that you and I would think of as mind-bendingly difficult that these guys are so familiar with that to them that's just like learning to write like cursive or whatever. It's a skill that they just picked up, and for whatever reason they're able to understand it quicker than your average person and therefore progress onto the next level.
Right, couple of things. Hatchie says he's been cut, slashed, beaten, and lost something. Almost bled out coming off a bike about 80. Yeah, that was wild. I had a crow doing 80 once with my face.
This explains a lot.
I was wearing a helmet, but it was freaking wild. I blacked out for like, I reckon about no more than a second, because when I my head was thrown back so violently because crows are pretty heavy, you know, and when one hits you
with your head being pushed, like flung back that violently. If you think about the effect on your brainstem. Yeah,
I blacked out for about a second, but when I came to, I was still on a straight line and managed to stop the bike. But I was covered in blood, mainly crow's blood. Although the thing had pushed the visor in that hard that it hit me across the nose and was keeping my eyes shut. I thought I was blind in one eye until I managed to pull the visor out. But so yeah, Hatchie, that was wild. Dave Barnes says, did anyone have vivid dreams after a near-death experience? And that's a good question, because I don't know about you, and I can't really recall anything about. I don't think I've ever had a near-death experience. I've had points where, well, there was one point where I nearly drowned, but I didn't actually drown, so I wasn't near death. But did anyone have really, really vivid dreams? 2020, 2021? Because my dreams just went through the roof.
I go through phases of it. I've had...
Yeah, but in particular, 2020, 2021, you know what I'm saying?
Mate, I can barely remember what I had for lunch last Wednesday.
Oh, for fuck's sake, 2020, you know what happened in 2020? You know what happened in 2020?
Well, yeah, but I can't tell you whether I was going through a bloody end of a relationship breakup.
Oh, was that in 2020? Right, okay.
Yeah, no, beginning of 2020, well, the whole world was worrying about COVID. I was going through, I was actually enjoying being locked down because I didn't have to, but
yeah, my dreams went wild in 2020, absolutely wild.
I mean, I do have periods where I dream more than others.
Yeah.
For me, when I had the flat, after I had the flat renovated, when it was all done, I had a period where I was dreaming on a level that I don't normally dream at.
Really?
Yeah.
You'd have thought you'd have been more. You'd have thought you'd have been more worried about it before it got done, not after. That's weird, isn't it?
I think it's, to be honest,
a release.
For me, well, I think that dreams and that deep REM sleep are when the brain has a chance to process things, and it can't do that until it feels like there's some closure. Yeah. Because while everything is ongoing, it all has to be in this sort of higher level consciousness, and you have to be able to think about these things. And then once it's over, the brain can take all of that stress and all of particularly with the renovation, when there's masses of disruption and change and everything else that is all kind of difficult for the human psyche to deal with. And then once that's all over, your brain kind of, you don't keep all of that stuff around. It just gets processed down and filed away by your brain. It moved from conscious memory to subconscious memory. And I think dreams are actually part of that process. I think they're manifest in all sorts of different ways, because you can have particularly vivid dreams when you're massively stressed. But I think after a particularly stressful situation, you can also have really vivid dreams, which is your brain essentially just dotting the I's and crossing the T's and figuring out what the hell it's going to do with all of these bits of information. And it can't stay in the conscious mind, so it has to get moved out.
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit like clearing out your C drive, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah.
And also doing backups. It's like if you look at some of the big social media networks and stuff, they have different levels of storage. They've got a certain amount of your timeline is in quickly accessible memory, and then if you want to start going back to what you were posting in 2019,
everyone slows down.
It then has to spin up like longer term storage, which is different, probably, I don't know, tapes or whatever the hell it is that they use.
Well, it's probably still hard drives, but it's probably physical ones as opposed to SSDs.
And so you end up with these different layers of memory, and I think that's a good analogy for, well, our current understanding of how the brain works. I think the human brain is infinitely more complicated than that. But it goes back to the question of how I've always wondered this ever since I first heard that humans actually only use a very small percentage of what they're capable of using, of what the brain is capable of. It's like, how the hell do you unlock the rest of it? And if you manage to unlock the rest of it, how does that change you as a person? Does it give you what we would think of as supernatural abilities? Do you get the ability to to process things.
Well, let's
much
think
more
about this.
quickly or something.
Let's think about this for a second, right? So, both you and I think consciousness comes in rather than is generated from within. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, if it's coming in, who's controlling what you receive? Is it the meat sack, or is it the transmitter?
So I just had to have a drink because
Yeah.
I said meat sack.
Yeah, I know. Is it the meat sack or the transmitter? That's the question.
Well, that's a very good question. Maybe it's a combination of both. Maybe the transmitter is regulating how much of the consciousness enters the body based on what the meat sack is capable of receiving.
Yeah.
Or maybe the consciousness is blasting it at 100%, or the field is blasting it at 100%, and the meat sack is not capable of dealing with it at 100%. So some part of the human brain kind of dials it down.
Yeah.
And then as the mind becomes more advanced, it dials it up.
Yeah.
But then someone like Nikola Tesla, or some of these super smart, like ridiculously smart genius level people, do they use more than 10% of their brains?
Yeah, but do you not think, right, if you really wanted to, right, do you not think you could probably use a lot more of your brain than you actually do? Because, let's face it, we all slack off all the time.
Sure.
Really, right? Now, if we really wanted to be on it, how much of your brain power could you be using if you really, really wanted to be on it, you know? If you cut out all the shit, you know, no distractions.
But I still think we're still limited.
Yeah.
I think that even if you cut out all distractions and you spent all of your time eating exactly the right things and giving yourself exactly the right brain food,
Yep.
and the nutrition and the information, and you are constantly learning. And I mean, one of the things about brain power that I find fascinating is languages, because when you learn another language, your brain actually splits part of itself off. You have language centers, that there's parts of your brain that when you learn another language, there's a part of your brain that actually creates a new section to deal with that language. For example, I can't think in English and talk in Dutch. I have to think in Dutch.
I know what you mean.
Order to speak in Dutch.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because
And
obviously,
it's like,
when I lived in France, I tried to learn French. And I started to pick it up, and we went to French lessons and things like that. And you did find yourself thinking in French.
Yeah, you do.
Which is bizarre when you think about it, you know.
They say that you know when you're bilingual because you have your first dream in the other language.
Right, okay.
And I remember my first dream in Dutch, and it was really weird.
Well, it would be a smoking a pancake.
No, not quite. Austin Powers has got so much to answer for.
Stereotyping.
But it's more about how the brain works. And then there's people, and it's also as kids, if you're exposed to language as a child,
yeah,
it's because with me, my mum used to speak to my brother and I when we were little kids in Dutch.
Yeah.
And she was like really religious about that. But then when we actually, and we never learned to speak Dutch until we moved to Holland. But when we did, it only took both of us 6 months roughly before we could understand quite well what people were saying.
And what age were you though when you moved?
To speak it took a lot longer.
What age were you when you moved?
Sorry?
What age were you when you moved to Holland?
11.
Yeah.
And it took me, I didn't really get comfortable speaking Dutch until probably 16 or 17, but that was also because I resisted learning Dutch for most of my teenage years because I was a little shitbag, basically.
Yeah, teenagers are shits. A couple of good questions from the chat, if we can dip into it briefly. Where is it? Dave Barnes says, is a vivid dream a form of intuition? That's a good question, Dave. But what's to say, and shoot me down if you will, but what's to say this isn't the dream?
Well, this is one of the reasons I found The Matrix such a profound movie is that if you were in a dream, how would you be able to tell whether it was dream or reality? If we were in the Matrix, how would we know?
Yeah, and do you remember the wee guy that sold them out on the ship on the Nebuchadnezzar? Yeah, Cypher, when he sold them out because he wanted to go back. He wanted the stake, and why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you?
Well, certainly steak seems nicer than that slop they were eating.
Oh my god, that's worse than even porridge.
But
in fact, I quite like porridge, but it's not good for you. But I quite like it.
Well, no, porridge has its place as long as you're trying to get decent organic porridge oats, and because the problem with porridge is not porridge, it's glyphosate. But actually, particularly on a cold Scottish winter's morning, a bowl of porridge is really not a bad breakfast.
So, in response to that, David says, "Can someone wake me up then?" Fair point, Dave. Fair point. Right, next one is Matthew says, do we really believe that we only use part of our brain, or is it science hasn't fully understood how the brain works? That's a great question as well. I mean,
also completely valid.
Yeah, valid point, mate.
And it might also, one of the things I've wondered whether the brain needs the 90% to just deal with motor function, because if you think
no, I don't think so.
Well, although we're not thinking about it, it's like with the driving thing.
Right. Hang
on. Let me finish. Because when you're learning to drive the car, you need to be actively thinking about what you're doing.
Yeah.
When you've learned how to drive and you're just driving and you're not thinking about it anymore, is that using up the same amount of brain power?
No. Right. So the thing is, right, when you're learning a new skill, that's fine, but you're talking about using your body in the way it was designed to be used. So you have to look at bees, lizards, anything that moves on this earth that they have a tiny, tiny brain and they just move. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but lizards are not thinking about being lizards.
But we're not thinking about moving.
Yeah, but no, we're not. But I'm sure that the lizard is not sitting there thinking about alchemists.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, so it doesn't need a big brain, and it doesn't have a big brain.
Yeah, but are we using up, just because we're sitting here having this really in-depth metaphysical, psychological, philosophical conversation, and we're both really thinking about what we're talking about, and we're also we're monitoring the chat a little bit, and we're actually trying to string words together. If you think about what our brains are doing right in this moment that we're not conscious of, like stringing words together, for example, and
remember,
even just the muscles keeping the head pointed at the camera,
right? Okay.
For example, there's an awful lot of brain power being used.
I don't think there is, okay? But let's just go back to what you said earlier, okay? So the entire telephone network of the world is a P in connections compared to what our brain has inside our head. So really, do you think we would swamp the entire telephone network of the world just trying to keep ourselves looking at the camera and talking? Do you know what I mean? And I'm not trying to be a dick about it, but I can't see that much being involved in keeping us upright and talking.
Well, not necessarily in the conscious mind, but if you think about all of the different muscles that your brain has to control in order just to keep your keep you upright to start with, and you're not thinking about any of that stuff in the same way that when you've learned to drive a car and you got past that learning. So it's like when kids learn to walk. It's like we have to be taught how to walk.
But
then at some point we kind of fall over a lot.
Well,
and then we build the muscles up and we get up. And then after a while, we're not thinking about it anymore.
Right. Okay. But do you not think that most animals, right, learn how to walk? Okay. And it doesn't. Do you not think most of this stuff is in your brainstem and in your reptile brain? You know, the part that's the cerebellum that the frontal lobes in that the other animals don't have, that we don't need if we just want to be, animals. If we just want to be able to walk and,
Sure.
do things. You know what I mean? And it's this frontal lobe that's the part we're not using to our, allegedly we're not using to our full extent. So why would we need to use a frontal lobe if these animals that can do the same things don't have them?
Oh, no, I see what you mean. Is that we're talking about different parts of the brain.
Yeah, yeah.
But then which part is it? Is our cerebellum that we're only using 10% of?
I think
and that
so.
The rest of it is being handled by the other, like the monkey brain?
Yeah, well, I mean, the brainstem that does all the autonomic nervous system stuff, doesn't it? Like how to breathe and keep breathing and heartbeat. Well, I think they've found brain cells I shouldn't say brain cells in the heart. What I should say is they've found that the heart has neurological cells.
So does the stomach.
Yeah, does it? The stomach?
Yeah. No, there's a lot of, it's like, for example, a lot of the neurotransmitters, things like serotonin, are actually produced in the gut.
Right.
And then sent to the brain. And the in the same way that the heart has neurological cells.
I knew the heart had them, but...
Well, that's why we have this expression, gut feeling.
Oh, yeah, of course. Trust your gut. Yeah.
Yeah, these things don't just happen in the brain. The brain is almost like the conductor of an orchestra or something like that. Yeah. And this then takes us back to the question of why the hell would we evolve with? Okay, so for some reason humans evolved with the cerebellum, which gives us the ability to be conscious and sentient of, we're not just in flight or fight. We're not just looking for feeding and mating and everything else, that we have this ability to think about stuff and to worry and to feel anxiety or to feel hope or love or not just feel love, because animals feel love as well, but to actually think about feeling love. It's not just I have these feelings and I act on them or I don't act on them.
Yeah.
It's about humans can abstract themselves and sit down and meditate and say, what's going on in that brain? And actually think about and observe the mind from a third-party perspective, which I don't think a cat or a dog or a giraffe or whatever does. I don't know about dolphins and whales and some of those sorts of creatures.
Well, they've got cerebellums as well. They've got big brains.
But I mean, it's like if you look at dolphins, they like to play. And is that a sign of intelligence, for example? But I don't know. It's fascinating. It's also 11, just so we know.
Sorry, you're working tomorrow, aren't you?
No. I've got the week off.
Oh, you've got the week off. Well, it's up to you.
I don't mind.
I'm okay.
I'm just thinking, we've still got people in chat, so I don't think we put everyone to sleep. I mean,
no, but we've actually picked up yours.
Well, it's one of those conversations that we could go on for 4 or 5 hours quite easily, because it's fascinating.
When Ben and I first started, we used to do 3-hour shows. It was, I don't know how we did it, but it was crazy.
But the thing is that it's like I haven't been looking at the time. I didn't even notice it. I thought it might have been about 10:30 or something, but it's but again,
Yeah, it's 10 past 11, yeah.
But you see, this also speaks to the actual topic of conversation, particularly if we're going to circle back to alchemists. Are alchemists people that have simply used or learned how to use a larger proportion of their brain than the rest of us? Is that something that characterizes what an alchemist is? Is it maybe something they're born with? It's like Tesla, for example. Are there people who are born, maybe some autistic people, perhaps? Maybe autism is, or maybe in a way it manifests as the brain working too fast, for example, because some autistic people are unbelievably good at maths and things like that.
At certain things, yeah. I think autism, and this might hurt some people because I do have a autistic son, but I think autism is a short circuit somewhere in the brain, because
we have to be a bit careful with the subject matter.
Yeah, I know, but
I've heard all sorts of things about heavy metal toxicity and.
Well, yeah, there is all that, but I think it's kind of a short circuit, and I don't know what causes it, but I don't think it's.
I do, but I'm not allowed to say.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay, but I don't think it's. I don't think it's a superpower. I really don't. And it's like people keep posting pictures on Twitter of ADHD brains and scans and how they're all lit up and saying that ADHD is a superpower, and it's like, well, that's fine. If it's a superpower, then you would be able to concentrate on one thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it speaks to the complexity and actually, when you think about it, beauty of the human brain.
Yeah.
That it's even, because there's no such thing as an autistic giraffe.
No.
And whatever causes it is neither here nor there. That's not true, strictly speaking. I mean, obviously it matters, but for the purposes of our conversation, we're talking about how the brain works. And my question is, do alchemists have bigger brains than the rest of us in the sense that they use more of it? Or do they discover something that allows them? Is there a technique or ancient knowledge that somehow allows one to use more than 10% of their brain?
That's a good question.
Is it something that we can train? Is it something that's been, because if you look at the way that parents raise their kids, it's like your parents raised you probably in a similar way to the way that their parents raised them. And the same is true of me. And mistakes, I can see things that my dad used to do that my grandfather also used to do. And an inclination in myself to do similar things as well. And now, is that particular training somehow? Are we dumbing our kids down before they even get started? Is there something about how we're teaching kids that is shutting that part down, because that serves whoever is trying to control us? Because if you had an entire world full of people that were all running at 100% of their brain power and everyone's like super genius level, they're not very easy to control. And actually running a society with people like that would probably be bloody difficult.
Yep. Yeah, it would.
So it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. We can probably keep going about this one for hours and hours, because it is genuinely interesting.
Yeah. So let me just read the conclusion here for Alchemy, and then we can carry on if we wish. alchemy is a subject of great complexity and rich symbolism. It's not merely a pre-scientific attempt at creating gold, but a profound system of thought and practice focused on both material and spiritual transformation. The sources highlight the need for careful study and a nuanced understanding, challenging modern misconceptions and encouraging a deeper exploration of the alchemical tradition. It calls for a return to understanding the esoteric element of the craft, to see it as a way to transmute not just base metals, but the soul itself. I think that's quite profound.
I think it's very profound.
I think it's quite good.
Well, I mean, we've had an extremely profound discussion this evening. Which
Yeah.
it's kind of, I was looking forward to it because it's one of those topics that leads into a lot of other things that are really, really interesting. And this notion that it's, because you can see parallels in the alchemist's journey and the initiation rites into alchemy. That's actually quite similar to the initiation into Buddhist enlightenment and the stages that Buddhists that you need to go through to achieve Buddhahood. So maybe alchemists were just Buddhas, which is an interesting theory. But it does speak to the potential of, it's like this idea of turning lead into gold, that somehow we're all we all have that ability within us. But then there's also metaphors. You don't even necessarily need to get metaphysical, because you could also say turning lead into gold is trying to be the best version of yourself. If we're talking about it in sort of new age terms, where
absolutely,
even if you're waking up every day and you're trying to be a better person and you're trying to be more of what you want to be, whether that's compassionate or intelligent, or you're waking up every day and really you're trying to make as much money as you possibly can because you're playing the Bitcoin markets or whatever. Just waking up and trying to aim to go to bed feeling like you've achieved something, and that you've tried to improve yourself. Maybe that's what we're talking about. Maybe that.
Yeah, I think that is, mate. I think
transforming lead into gold.
Yeah, I think the lead into gold is more or less a metaphor, and I think the people that actually tried to turn lead into gold were picking it up wrong. I think it was all about improving yourself.
But maybe, given the way that certain groups in human society seek to control the flow of information and seek to control others by controlling the flow of information,
like the church, like communist governments, like so-called democratic governments, like there are always
USAID.
There are always well, I'm pretty sure USAID is a CIA-run organization behind the scenes.
Well, this is more for tomorrow's show, but fontable freaking evil.
Oh, CIA,
or a large section of evil, for sure.
Yeah, CIA. But I mean, I think there's always a group that has its own interests at heart over the general population, and the problem is the general population is huge, so you have to control them. It's like, how does a sheepdog control 100 sheep?
The thing is that humans are a self-organizing collective. That this is the big secret that government doesn't want us to know. Is that we don't need them, because if there was no government, people would organize themselves. We do it naturally. It's not even something that we have to.
I've got something to say about this, but I'm going to hold it for tomorrow.
Yeah, no, let's, because we're now getting into all in territory and it's bloody late. We should let our audience go to bed.
We should, Our audience are going to bed, but no, I mean, I've had a great night.
It's been fun.
That was
Really, really
interesting.
good chat.
It was interesting. It's alchemy is one of those subjects that you think it's going to be over in half an hour, and it's not. It's one of these things that could take days to really go into properly.
Absolutely. And yeah, wine helps with it because it makes you all philosophical.
Well, yeah,
But doesn't
of course it does. Yeah.
But yeah, it's been great. Really good chat.
Hold on. Dave says, before you go, have you got something to bring up, Dave? Quick. You didn't answer the airgun question, all right? Well, yeah, so you put... Can I say it on you? Well, probably. So if you have an air rifle and you want to make the bullet go out or the projectile go faster, if you put a little bit of like 3-in-1 or light machine oil into the... Not into the barrel, but into the part behind it that gets charged by the air. You just put a little bit of machine oil in there. Not a lot, just a little, right? And what happens is the compression of the air compresses the machine oil. And effectively, you know how a diesel engine works?
Mm-hmm.
The ignition isn't a spark plug, it's fired by compression. So what happens is you turn your air rifle into a fucking proper gun.
Right. Jackie, that's useful to know for zombies.
Yeah.
Can we just point out that we are giving people advice of what to do in the event of a zombie invasion?
Yeah, this is not something to try at home because everything like this is always dangerous.
Don't do this.
Don't do it.
And on that note,
yeah, there you go. That's what dieseling is. Right. So with that, we'll be back tomorrow night, and tomorrow night's not that far away now because it's it's now nearly 11:30. But yeah, I've had a great night. Thank you, Ed.
Good fun. Yeah, it's been good fun. Cheers.
And I'm pretty sure it's been great for you.